Every year on the first Sunday in Lent, we hear this story of Jesus' temptation. The dust of Ash Wednesday has become the sand of the desert, the wilderness, that place of temptation where we are once again brought face to face with those things that draw us from the love of God. Now, I don't need to tell a bunch of smart and savvy and sophisticated Episcopalians that the power of temptation is strong. Daily, we face countless situations and meet countless individuals who lure us and lie to us and entice us, provoke us, threaten us, scare us into believing false truths, provoking us to do and to think things that are very ungodly. And while that's extremely serious business, some temptations are humorous, especially when parents are tempted to outdo one another as they brag about their children. For example, 4 devout Roman Catholic mothers were having coffee together following the Ash Wednesday Mass. The first tells her friends, "Do you know that my son, I don't know if you know this, my son is a priest, and whenever he walks into the room, they address him as Father." And then the second one quickly chimes in, "No kidding, I had no idea, my son is a bishop. When he walks into the room, everybody, calls him Your Grace." Well, the third one, of course, not to be outdone, just gasps. She's like, "This is unbelievable. What a small world. My son is a cardinal. When he walks into a room, everybody actually stands and says, Your Eminence." Well, the fourth woman, who's been listening to these proud Roman Catholic mothers brag about their sons' accomplishments in the church, takes a sip of coffee, folds her hands almost prayerfully on her lap, and then leans over the table, and with a twinkle in her eye, she says, "You know what? My son isn't very religious, but he's 6'2", he has broad shoulders, 10% body fat, gorgeous brown eyes, and thick wavy hair. He dresses out of GQ, he's pulling down a 6-figure income, drives a Porsche. When my son comes walking into a room, everyone turns and says, 'Oh my God.'" The good news is that Jesus knows that kind of temptation. We are not alone. Before he even catches his breath or dries his hair, Jesus is thrown by the Holy Spirit like a javelin from the waters of his baptism into the sandy, rocky desert. No sooner does Jesus feel the embrace of God's arms around him, if you remember, hears that voice of God calling him his beloved child, then Jesus finds himself in that deserted place where God feels far, far away, and Jesus feels very, very alone. And it's in that place where Jesus encounters the silence of his own thoughts, when he's by himself, that he is tempted to go it alone, to be his own source of authority, to just be his own person. Jesus is tempted to use worldly power to get his own way, to dominate others, to take center stage. Jesus is tempted to trust the feelings of his own gut rather than to trust in the promises of God. The temptation of Jesus is our constant companion as well. And no matter what form it takes, it has one kind of basic theme. There's always the struggle between having and the struggle with being. In our culture and all of us, we really do live by that kind of credo that says, I am what I have. And then our life's goal is single purpose. We're to have more, to accumulate more, to hold more, to control more. Riches, you see, always lead to those places of honor, and then those places of honor bring us great pride. So, who needs God when I have me? Grasp and get and gain. That's what the devil is offering Jesus in those temptations. You can have it all, the devil says to Jesus up there on the pinnacle, looking down in the temple. Billionaire J. Paul Getty, remembered by many of us not only for his wealth but also his frugality and his thriftiness, was once asked by a member of the press, "Mr. Getty, how much is enough?" And Getty replied, "Enough is always just a little bit more than what I have." He died in 1976 worth $26 billion in today's valuation. Jesus resists this temptation to grasp and to get and to gain. He leaves that wilderness more confident about his life's work and a clear sense of his own priority. His identity has been aligned with that imago Dei, that image of God that's imprinted within his heart. His true identity he finds out there by himself isn't just what God says, "You are my beloved." Jesus says, "I really am God's beloved." He commits to trusting in the power of God to give him everything he would ever need in his life. And at that time, Jesus decides then that he will serve the Lord his God with all of his heart and his soul and his mind. And he does that by giving everything he has to God, including the last breath he takes, dying on that cross for you. So what about us? How can we resist those daily temptations to trust ourselves more than God? How do we align ourselves with our truest and best God-given natures? Well, the answer is so simple, we miss it. The answer is to cultivate a life of thanksgiving and give to God the best of what you have to offer. In that reading from Deuteronomy that we just heard this morning, Moses is telling the Israelites what to do before they enter into the promised land. And Moses says, "Never forget God's care for you. And when you do remember how God saved you over and over and over again from the tyranny of Pharaoh. Remember how God heard your plea for help when you were oppressed in Egypt. And remember how God has given you this land. He has given you this land as a gift, and it is overflowing with milk and honey. Celebrate this gift from God," Moses says, "by bringing an offering, the first fruit of the land that God has given it to you, and setting it down before the altar of God. And this offering is not because God needs it. The offering is so that you will be reminded that the land you possess belongs to God and you are just its stewards. The bountiful harvest it yields is God's gift to you. Don't ever forget to thank God by returning to God that which belongs to God and not you." It sounds so simple. And it's no different for you and me. When we give God our genuine thanks and praise, I'm not talking about kind of a wink and a nod or sort of a tip of a hat to God. I'm not talking about offering plates and putting a few dollars in there to get the rector off your back. When we are truly thankful, it becomes harder and harder for us to be tempted into believing that we are more powerful than God, or that we can manipulate life to serve our own wants and to satisfy all of our insatiable appetites. And when we give God thanks, by physically returning to God the first fruits of our lives, so that we never forget that we never can forget that this life is a gift. It is a God gift that's wrapped in a gorgeous South Florida sunny March morning. And it is a God gift when the hurricanes are flying overhead. It is a God gift when you are living a moment of life where you just want to pinch yourself. It is so good when you hear the cry of that child. And it is also a gift from God when you can barely breathe, for you are under so much duress. Life, it is a gift overflowing with the grandeur of God. It is the gift of God, as we say every Eucharist. It is the gift of God given for the people of God. Thank you is the ultimate no to the seductive, tempting power of egos that grasp and get and gain. Another little story might help you remember. This came across the internet by somebody here, so you might have read it or seen it before, but maybe you'll remember the sermon from this. A newly arrived soul is met up in heaven by St. Peter. Peter says, I got to take you on a little tour. So he walks both of them side by side into this huge, massive workroom filled with angels. Peter stops in the front part of this section and he says, see, this is the receiving section. Here all of the petitions to God are said and prayers are received. The soul looks at that section and there are 150,000 angels trying to sort through all these requests and get them all filed up and ready to go. And then they walk down to the next section of this massive room, and Peter tells the soul, this is the packaging and the delivery section. Here the grace and the blessings that the people have asked for are all being packed up and they're being delivered, and the soul sees how busy it is. There are so many, many angels, you can't even count them all working in that room. Finally, the very, very far corner of the room is the last section. And there's no one working in it except one angel kind of sitting in the corner on his cell phone. And this section, Peter says, is the acknowledgement section. Well, how is that come there's no work, says the soul? Well, that's the sad thing. After people receive the blessings they request, very few actually ever send a thank you. If you have food in the fridge, which, looking at all of you and kind of knowing us, I'm sure you do. I see everyone has clothes on their back this morning. I guarantee that pretty much all of us here have a roof over our head of some kind, large or small. You're going to go home tonight. Looking around, I think most of you have like a bed to sleep in. You and I, all of us, we have more material wealth in that bit than I looked up the statistic yesterday. It's about 75% of the rest of the world this day. If you have any money in the bank, it doesn't matter how much. If you have some money in your wallet, your purse, if you have even a little change dish by the front door, throw your coins into? You and I are among the 8% wealthiest people on the planet. If you woke up this morning with more health than illness, which, we're all sitting here, so that's probably true for all of us, don't forget that this week, 1.1 million people will die. If you're here, which you are, we're all sitting here attending church. Yeah, we've got a few security guards outside to keep us safe. But you came here without harassment, without torture, fear of death. It's staggering. 74% of the world's population, regardless of faith, is able to do what we're doing this morning by worshiping in freedom. If you walk in here and you hold up your head with a smile on your face, and you are truly thankful by giving to God the first fruits of your labor, your life, your heart, then will you please speak up and help all of us who cannot make that same leap of faith? Help us in our temptations. Don't waste another Lent. Don't play small with these 40 days. Don't give up candy because that's what you did when you were an infant. Dig a little deeper. Examine the temptations in your heart that draw you from loving God wholly and completely. Decide. Make a conscious decision. This year, this Lent, I am going to do everything in my power to nurture and create this attitude in my life of gratitude. And then trust God by taking that crazy risk of returning the first fruits of your heart, so that making an offering to God is not a chore or an obligation or another bill to pay. It is a blessing. You are blessed. Next week, as the pamphlet you all have in your bulletins explain and kind of encourage you to begin thinking about, we begin, the annual stewardship campaign, right? Every congregation has to have a stewardship campaign. There are budgets to support. You don't see anything about a budget in here. St. Mark's doesn't give to a budget. The challenge is not what does St. Mark's need to do the work that God gives us to do. The challenge is, what do I need to give in thanksgiving for what God has given to me? This week, take this little thing, put it in your prayer book, put it by your Bible, put it by your bed, wherever you gather to say your prayers, as Mandy encouraged us to do. Examine the abundance of all that is good in your life. Take a look again at your paychecks. Pull out, we're just getting our tax returns done. Look at your tax return, not as an item that you have to file with the government, but as a kind of a record of your financial life this past year. Open up your checkbooks, look at your savings accounts, those retirement accounts that we're all crazily worried about. Look at your family funds and see where God has blessed you. Take a closer look at your own families, your grandchildren, your spouses. Look in the faces of your friends, your teachers, your physicians. Kind of notice under the cap, notice the person who's cutting your lawns this week. Pay attention to the waiter or the waitress at the restaurant you're going to go to this afternoon. Look at your clothes and your cars and your homes and your vacation destinations and see how God has blessed all of us. And then have that honest conversation in the wilderness of your hearts, where temptations are so strong about your loyalty to this God who has given us this land, flowing with milk and with honey. Who owns your heart? To whom do your loyalties belong? And do you honestly give God thanks for the first fruits of your life? Or are you kind of putting last night's leftovers at that altar? Nothing will drive the devil farther from your heart than a life that is filled with praise and with thanksgiving to a God from whom all of our blessings flow. May it be for you and for me as it was for Jesus when he left that desert to do the work that God had given him to do.